A looming Turkish invasion into Syria once again, while at the same time the new government is consolidating and showing prospects of future peace. But we'll talk about this as well as about anything else that has happened in Syria over the past few days in this situation report. The United States, the United Nations, the European Union, Turkey, and several Arab states met in Jordan to discuss the situation in Syria. They agreed that the transfer of the current system has to be led by the Syrians itself. The US are also in direct talks with HTS, the organization that was previously a part of Al-Qaeda, and HTS is clearly showing the aim that they want to get in good terms with the US, at least as of now. When they found an American citizen in one of the prisons, they already handed him over to the Americans in Syria itself, where the Americans still have a military presence. France is also sending a mission into Damascus, and the French flag has already been raised at the embassy building. Germany is also sending a mission, and the talks will include HTS, which is still designated a terrorist organization. The talks will include the reopening of diplomatic relations and the reopening of the German embassy. Iran is saying that the debt that the Assad regime incurred will have to be paid by the new government. Whether this will turn out well will obviously be the question. We have to understand that Iran basically financed the war against Assad's war against the rebels. So the rebels are now asked by Iran to pay for the money that was financing them being killed. The New York Times is writing that al-Shara, which is the normal name of al-Jolani. Al-Jolani was his nom de guerre. So now he's calling himself al-Shara again, which was the name he was given at birth, his family name. He's saying they want to keep the agreement with Israel from 1974. In 1974, the deconfliction was agreed between Israel and Syria after the Yom Kippur War. In the meantime, there was still a war of attrition between Syria and Israel, and this agreement then held for decades. It established a buffer zone that was between the two of them and observed by the United Nations, and Syria agreed to prevent terrorism over the Golan against Israel. This was the longest lasting agreement Israel ever had with an Arabic state, even longer than the peace agreements with Egypt that happened longer. So while Syria and Israel are technically still at war, they never signed a peace agreement. The deal between the two of them about the Golan Heights in 1974 was holding longer than the peace agreement with Egypt. Al-Shara is also asking that HTS has been taken off the terrorist list, and the money that was frozen has to be freed again. He's asking for that as well to allow for the country to be rebuilt. In the political sphere, he announced that his government, the interim government, is announcing that members of the media will be held accountable if they have directly or indirectly allowed or enabled crimes against the Syrian population. In the past, we're talking now about propagandists for Assad himself. This is obviously kind of problematic, as directly or indirectly allows for a lot of interpretation, which will allow for abuse if the justice system, if the new justice system or the new rulers aim for that, but we'll have to see how that is going to happen. They also announced that they want to increase the wage for government employees by 400%. The question will obviously be, how do they want to finance that? Bashar al-Assad, the previous president and dictator of Syria, has published a statement. You can pause the video here in case you want to read it. He basically was saying that he only moved to Latakia to continue fighting from there, but as the army was completely collapsing, the Russians basically flew him out against his own wishes. The Russians have already said this is nonsense, but he tried to sell himself like he wanted to keep fighting, but the Russians were evacuating him against his will. At the same time, Reuters is reporting that a mass grave was found that supposedly has more than 100,000 corpses in it, close to Damascus. More than 100,000 people are missing at the same time too, from the Sednaya prison and other prison systems like this. Obviously, we'll have to see if they actually find 100,000 corpses in there, but this is the report that's coming out right now. In the judicial system, or in the consolidation of the government, we have the announcement then that the new government wants to reform the security system completely. Institutions that previously have been a source of terrorism against the own population will be abandoned. Laws, regulations, and rules will be adjusted to the new requirements, and the current government is already recruiting new policemen for Homs, Hama, and Damascus itself. Ahmed al-Shara, that's al-Julani, was also talking to the UN Special Envoy to Syria for the implementation of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2254. In it, that it was decided, I think, in 2015. There they asked for an immediate ceasefire, a new constitution, and free and fair elections within 18 months. This is so far we do not hear from the new government that they want to implement this. The current interim government is supposed to rule until March, but so far they have not announced when elections are going to happen. And al-Shara also said that the country is not ready for elections yet. Also, there is no public steps in the direction of a constitution yet. Obviously, the new government only controls the country for a week now, so we can't expect too much yet, but we should acknowledge that so far, at least, there is no public declaration when the constitution will come, what it will include, and when elections are supposed to happen. Let's talk about the SDF, that is the Syrian Democratic Forces. That's the brand name of the alliance that mostly includes Kurds. They are increasingly under pressure. The pressure against them, this is the yellow areas here on the map. The pressure is increasing by the day. They had a 4-day ceasefire with the SNA, the Syrian National Army. Those are basically Turkish proxies in Manbij. It ran out without extensions, so the 4-day ceasefire is over. Before it was over, it was already published that the SNA blocked attempts to evacuate civilians and members of SDF personnel from that area. So the SNA was already in the process of breaking it, as well as occupying the dam at this point. Right now, we cannot expect a permanent ceasefire. The SDF is saying because of the Turks are preventing this, and the Turkish foreign minister also said the aim of Turkey is the destruction of the SDF. So they publicly say they want to destroy the whole SDF. Right now, as the Russians are also withdrawing from that area, they had several bases in the area that is in yellow here. They are withdrawing towards the coast, including the helicopter base at Kamishli. They are also withdrawing. This allows that they are no longer in the way for the Turks if they want to advance against the SDF, where in the past Russian presence had basically protected the SDF from the Turks. Arabic parts of the SDF are also switching over to HTS all the time. There probably won't be many Arab parts left, except maybe some deep in the Kurdish controlled areas where they are too afraid to switch sides at the very moment. But wherever they can, they seem to be abandoning the SDF as of now. This should not be a surprise. The alliance was built out of necessity, not out of love, because the only opportunities for the Arabs in that region was to side with the Kurdish forces, to side with Assad, or to side with the Islamic State at some point. So they basically had no choice but to sign up with the SDF, as they were the least of the evils in the local areas. But it was never an Arabic alliance, and there was obviously not too much love lost with them leaving the alliance now as soon as they can. Al-Shara also said, though, and that's some good news for the SDF at least, or for the Kurds, Al-Shara has said in an interview he will try to get Afrin, which is up here and was Kurdish controlled and had a majority Kurdish population before the Turkish invasion. He wants to return it to the Kurds if he can, and the other areas in the north, so probably this year as well. This is in each cases when the Turks invaded, the Kurds there were fleeing and they were replaced with Syrian refugees from Turkey. That was one of the reasons why Turkey invaded several times into Syria. Right now, the The latest news are that the US are expecting a imminent invasion of the Kurdish controlled areas of Rojava by the Turkish armed forces. They see concentration of special forces, of artillery, and of their proxy militias along the border, so they expect them to cross over and try to engage the SDF further in the near future. When it comes to national unity, HTS has now the control over Dara and the Nasib border here to Jordan. This is showing that HTS is continuing to consolidate control over all of the country. The Southern Operations Room, who was an opponent of Al-Qaeda affiliated Al-Nusra, which is basically the founding of HTS, or Al-Nusra developed into HTS, and the Southern Operations Room fought against Al-Nusra in the past. Now they are working with Al-Julani, so at least out of necessity, or they believe HTS has changed since then. Before we also have informations about how the operation to topple Assad was planned. By now, it became public that the rebels made an alliance out of 25 rebel organizations 1 year ahead of the offensive. It was planned that the southern uprising was to happen. It was supposed to only happen after the capture of Homs, though, but them in the south were obviously impatient and saw the tide turning, so they rose up earlier than it was agreed to. 10 out of 14 districts of Syria are now under control of HTS, so they're consolidating. I guess the last ones left are the ones that are in Rojava, so HTS is consolidating. The unity agreement with SDF apparently was not correct. There are negotiations, there are talks, but so far it has not been achieved. There is the claim that Rojava, the Syria's, basically the Syrian-led administration, was asking for fighting to stop and unity was to aim for. They clearly see the necessity, but so far it has not achieved. Still though, at the same time, HTS is working on unity. They are opening further bureaus for former soldiers of the Syrian Arab Army, of the Assad-affiliated forces. Now one in Latakia. It has also opened the Alawite heartland, where soldiers can get registered and hand over their weapons, and as we can see, long lines of men are arriving and you see rifles among them, so they bring their guns to hand them over. Obviously the trust by them is for the moment big enough that they are willing to disarm for national unity as of now. Then we have reports from HTS's plans. They want to reform the SAA, the Syrian Arab Army, but not disband it. This clearly shows how HTS has learned from the past. We remember that the United States disbanded the Iraqi army after the defeat of Saddam Hussein. This led to a lot of the soldiers that were previously in the regular armed forces being unemployed, having nothing to do, felt prosecuted, but at the same time they knew how to fight, they had weapons, so a lot of them went over to the insurgency, and basically the disbanded army was the core of the insurgency. Some of the Islamic State's leadership was even previously in Assad's army. One general, a red-haired general, for instance, later became one of the top people in the Islamic State. Here we see that HTS has learned from that and wants to prevent it. They're also negotiating with the 5th Army Corps that was supported by Russia. They are negotiating with them. So the interim government is talking to the 5th Army Corps to include them in a new Syrian Arab Army to a certain degree. And the majority of the 2,150 SAA soldiers that had fled to Iraq have already said they want to return home. So the majority of them trusts the new government enough to switch over and to join Syria again. This is a smart move by the new government to prevent the rise of terrorism against it. There was a video published of some former fighters for Assad that claim they are going to do an insurgency now, and it's possible that to some degree this will happen, but in the majority the public seems to be happy that the fighting is finally over and that peace can enter the country. And peace is supposedly going to continue. As we have the announcement, Al-Shara also said that the conscription will be abandoned. This in times of national needs, I guess in times of war, they will reintroduce conscription, but the aim is to create a new army out of volunteers only. This would be another example of the character where the new government clearly understands that with a country ravaged by war for over a decade, the focus must be on something else than military as of now, and those are signs that are going in this direction. We also have further examples of HTS's administration meeting with Christians, with other religious minority, continued signs of tolerance that is going to be spread. Obviously, it's too early. We have to see how they are actually going to implement all the rules. There's obvious skepticism towards an organization that has its ideological origins in Al-Qaeda. You can't be more hardcore orthodox radical Islamism than this. But as of now, at least, hope can still prevail and hope can still be set. We'll have to see how it develops. Skepticism is surely justified, but hope doesn't have to be lost as of now. About Israel, Al-Shara also said that Israel has taken Iran as a reason to enter Syria, but he said we don't aim for conflict with Israel. He insists that Syria will not be a basis for attacks on Israel. Syria, the new Syrian government, will not allow that Israel will be attacked from Syria. This is breathtaking news to see the context here, especially, of course, after Israel did all those airstrikes in the past days where they crippled the Syrian Arab army stocks to prevent them falling into the hands of terrorists. This could have led to outcries, to vows of revenge, but so far the new government, the interim government in Damascus, shows restraint, at least verbally. This is obviously the thing we still have to see how much of what is being said will be followed up with acts in the future. He also not just said that Israel won't be a basis for international for Syria will not be basis to attack Israel, but it seems to be followed up by measures now. The Palestinian armed groups are being disarmed, their training camps are being closed. So this is acts where they actually close down group organizations, training camps from organizations that are terrorists that have killed Israeli civilians in the past. The new interim government is closing them down. It's surely helped that a lot of those organizations were siding with Assad during the civil war, have participated in war crimes against the Syrian population. I'm sure that has helped for that decision as well. Then we have news about the Druze. As you know, in the last situation report about Syria, we talked about the claimed requests by the Druze here in the southwestern area of Syria to be occupied or even annexed by Israel. Now we could say probably the expected. The Druze have published a statement that where they actually admit that some of them were asking for annexation, but they say they are a minority. The majority stands with Syria. The interesting part is though that we see a video which shows 25 people. The video where the annexation by Israel claimed was a lot more people, so we'll have to see how it turns out. But as I said in the last video, the issue there will obviously be if Israel doesn't protect them, doesn't give them asylum, or doesn't actually follow up with an annexation, which was extremely unlikely to begin with, as Israel would just cause additional problems. Then they would face the wrath of their countrymen, of the other Syrians, for having sided with Israel. So this seems like the government is that the Druze representatives try to prevent further trouble to them here. But as said, they admit that there was a request for annexation, but they say, no, that was a minority. We are loyal to Syria. Still, though, there is cooperation. There are confirmed cooperations between local Druze leaders with the Israeli army forces. They are collecting weapons and hand them over to the Israelis, whereafter the Israelis are destroying them to prevent further trouble in the area there. But it shows that the Druze there have enough trust, apparently, in the Israeli armed forces that they do not feel the need to keep the weapons under the threat of violence. Obviously, the Israelis would not simply let them keep them, but it shows that their belief in the Israelis not meaning them harm to a degree where they have to risk repercussions for keeping the weapons. This seems to be enough trust on the Druze population. Why that might be the case, I talked to you about in the last situation report about Syria, where we were talking about the Druze in Israel and in the Golan Heights as well. Israeli airstrikes are continuing though. We see further strikes against ammunition depots. We see a huge explosion here that was supposedly in Tartus, where another ammo depot was struck. We have news from Russia as well, and from the Russian presence. This is a Russian mill blogger, Anastasia Kashevarova. Anastasia Kashevarova. She is generally well informed and one of the bigger mill bloggers too, and she's claiming that the Russian government has done an interim agreement with HTS for 75 days after that withdrawal. And that seems to be the truth because the evacuation is continuing. The Russians have already flown out, for instance, S-400 air defense systems, which we would expect to stay there in place if it continues. But that felt more like they want to get the most valuable out as fast as possible. All of it is a sign that the Russians expect, even though there are claims, there are discussions right now with the interim government, the Russian government clearly expects that they won't stay inside of Syria for much longer. So far, the reports are also that parts of the Russian Africa Corps have been sent to Khmymin to protect it during the evacuation, and we see that the trust in the local situation is limited too. We have a Kamo 52 here flying clear, it's guarding. It's trying to protect an Ilyushin 76 that is starting at Khmymin to give it cover during the starting process, to protect them. Also, for those interested, we see it coming back here and shows it only has the unguided missiles under its stubby wings and obviously the autocannon here on the side, but those are unguided. I think probably S-8 missiles. Don't quote me on this, but those are unguided missiles. That's all of the armament that the Kamo 52 has in this case here on that case. But it shows that the Russians are far from certain that they can stay in Syria right now. They expect they'll have to leave, and they expect that potentially they could be attacked. One of the reasons might be this. This is claimed to be a Syrian vacationer in Syria to not take it too serious. Supposedly this was a special forces from Syria, from Ukraine inside of Syria. We by now it's confirmed that HTS and other rebel groups gotten aid from the Ukrainians in their preparation of the offensive, and obviously those special forces might still be there, and some of them might be tempted to attack one of the transport planes or one of the numerous rebel groups that are not under full control of HTS and that have a lot of grief with the Russians still. Overall, though, there are hopeful signs, and not just from Syria itself. Some are from Gaza as well. There's a fresh research by the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. They did a survey inside of the Palestinian territories and inside of Gaza, and only 7% of the population in Gaza still want Hamas rule. Only Hamas rule. The rest is, to a certain degree, might want to accept a shared government, but the big support Hamas once had in the Gaza Strip is gone. 87% are blaming Hamas for the situation in Gaza, so almost 90%. 85% are blaming Israel, so they are blaming both Hamas and Israel, and 83% are blaming the US. But while that shows that they don't blame Hamas alone, they also blame the US and Israel, it actually shows that that slightly more are blaming Hamas than Israel. This is breathtaking. The survey also said an absurd 3% want Israel to rule and another 3% want Israel to handle the security situation. Obviously, that's irrelevant. 3% don't matter. But it also shows, despite the destruction in Gaza, 3%, 3 out of 100 say under Israeli rule, it would be better than all the alternatives. Still, it shows the unhappiness towards the Hamas leadership. Will show that Israel's goal of dismantling Hamas and taking away the leadership for Gaza is increasingly possible. And once the terrorists can't control Gaza Strip anymore, a repetition of the current war becomes less likely, and thus peace can enter. We also have very interesting banner here. I translated it with Google Lens. It said basically what he's writing here. So this is supposed to be the Damascus Bazaar, and a banner is hanging up which says that Iran used the excuse of fighting for the Palestinians to occupy Lebanon and Syria. So in the new Syrian capital, they blame Iran for the whole situation and not Israel. This is also breathtaking. And to top it off, when it comes to Iran itself, this is the Wall Street Journal, if I remember correctly, no, the Washington Post. They are writing that the Israeli attack on Iranian infrastructure, the second one, which destroyed the planetary mixers to create solid fuel for missiles. This has had such an effect that Iran's capacity to produce ballistic missiles has dropped from 2 a day to 1 per week, so from 14 to 1 a week, a massive reduction in Iran's capabilities to produce ballistic missiles. Obviously, not only will this mean more safety for Israel, but also that Iran can deliver less missiles to Russia, and thus it will help the Ukrainians as well. Finally, some absurd story. There was a video where a CNN reporter found a prisoner hiding under a blanket in Sednaya, and by now it's clear that he was a member of the military. He's claimed to be a torturer as well, but he was arrested apparently for extortion and theft in Homs, and not for that itself, but because he didn't share enough of his spoils with his superiors. So it was an Assad criminal that was, in quotation mark, rescued by a CNN reporter in the prison there. I do not accuse them of staging it all, even though it looked kind of weird that he appeared fairly well fed, fairly well clothed, and all of this. But this is a story that comes out of the chaos as well. To come to a conclusion, there are actually encouraging signs out of Syria. The rebel groups seem intent to come to a unity. They still show signs of tolerance that are still being spread around. Of course, there are some problematic images as well, fighters with the Islamic State patch on its side, but we'll have to see in the past, in events like this, in a revolution, in a civil war. Of course, there are radical elements as well. The big question will be, what will the interim government and the new government do with those radical elements? Can they suppress them, or will those radical elements take over? This is something that's still part of the story that still has to be written, but we see that at least from what they are saying, the new government wants unity and wants peace in the country itself and with its neighboring countries, and that's obviously encouraging. At the same time, it seems that Hamas has lost its footing in the Gaza Strip, so this might actually be a step to a more peaceful Middle East. At least hope for that doesn't have to die yet. Obviously, at the same time, the Turks seem to be bound to invade northeastern Syria. We can only hope that there is a way to a peaceful solution for Turkey. The SDF are basically the PKK, and they accuse the PKK to have caused 40,000 deaths. Obviously, there were justified problems that the Kurds were addressing at that point, and some people will always complain that I just talk about the Turkish perspective. But the Turkish government are blaming the PKK for over 40,000 deaths in Turkey due to their uprising, and they say the SDF are basically the PKK. So we'll have to see how that turns out. Overall, though, it could be far worse news. We'll have to pay attention to how it continues. So far, though, still encouraging signs from an area that is strife with fighting and discord and war over the past decades. There might be some silver lining on the horizon. If you enjoyed this situation report, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment. What do you think about the current developments? There would be a lot to discuss, I'm pretty sure. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.